Thank you, Simon. I'm hoping my voice holds out for half an hour or so apologies if it doesn't. But as Simon said, the title of the talk is Porn Panic, and it looks at, there are many ways you could describe it. It's based around my book, which was published by Zero Books about 5 months ago. And it's kind of, I've been an anti-fascist activist since the late 70s, and I was a pornographer from the mid-90s for the next 20 years, and it's kind of a combination of those two views of the world. It's a look at the modern era and fascism in the modern era from someone who's looked at fascism for maybe 40 years, but also I have a specific viewpoint because I got very close up to what the British state was doing in terms of censorship and so on, kind of by accident. So I should keep holding that and hold it up to the camera and stuff. So if you fancy going on Amazon and getting that, it's a very good read, if I say so myself. Preparing for this, I just read it for about the 7th time, and I keep thinking that the first third's a bit dry, but the second 2/3 are really good. So, yeah, I mean, the first question is how do you combine porn and fascism into a talk? And I keep finding it difficult to explain that, so hopefully I'll explain that over the next half hour, 20, 30 minutes. So yeah, as I say, I got involved in political activism in my teens. I came from one of those kind of left-wing royalty kind of thing. So my grandfather was at the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. He was a Jewish East Ender, and so that, you know, in left-wing terms, that's kind of royalty. And then, you know, so I come from a left-wing dynasty, and it was kind of natural that I got involved in left-wing politics in the late 70s. And even in the late 70s, left-wing politics hadn't changed that much over the generations, really. You adopted the ideas of your parents and you went in. In hindsight, everything changed around the late 70s, early 80s, but it took a long time. You have to kind of, you really need hindsight to realise that things were changing at the time. So I was kind of following in the family footsteps of being a socialist and getting involved in left-wing activism, and believing in the things that we believed in, trade unionism, social justice, and so on. And it all, from the point of view of the left, and my book's to an extent about the decline of the left, it all went to shit in the 1980s, but it took a long time to realise that. It took me till about 2011 to realise that. I became a software engineer in the mid-80s, and I got my first internet email account in 1988, which was really early, before the web existed. And I think, as I say in the book, I kind of dropped out of activism around that time. I kind of felt a bit guilty that I was leaving the revolution, my comrades behind. And in fact, I felt as though I was leaving the revolution, and in fact, I was joining the revolution. The revolution that we went through was driven by technology, not by politics, and the internet was a world-shaking invention. In 1995, I set up my own web software company because until 1995-ish, being in IT was really boring. You basically worked on telecom systems or account systems, and that was about it. And in 1995, it became sexy, and suddenly people wanted to talk to you at parties. And so I set up a company to build software for the web. I didn't intend to go into pornography. It just happened to be, first of all, the biggest industry on the web. And then after the 2001 dot-com crash, it was the only industry on the web. And it took a few years, really, for the online, for online commerce, online industry to develop. But for a long time, porn drove everything, you know, from the late 90s till the mid-2000s, probably. For example, nobody got a broadband connection unless they wanted to look at porn, because there was nothing to look at other than porn in the early broadband days. And I'd always been political, and I'd always felt left-wing, and I'd kind of drifted away from it. And after the 2008 crash, there was this resurgence of activism and Occupy and stuff that felt really exciting, and for me it felt really nostalgic. It was like the old days were back. And I thought, I'd kind of joined in, and I kind of brought these along to kind of illustrate what it was like to be a left-wing activist in the early 80s. And this is like a third of the pile of pamphlets that I have at home. And this is what, as a teenager in the early 80s, if you're going to be a left-wing activist, you read Fascism, What It Is and How to Fight It by Leon Trotsky, which is kind of current again. And we read Lenin, Engels, Marx, Trotsky, and a load of other stuff. And libertarians shouldn't sneer at this stuff. There's a lot to learn from this stuff. In particular, this is an interesting one. Lenin is called Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder, in which he mocks the kind of people that we call social justice warriors today. And so it's kind of, these discussions have been going on for a long time. And it turns out the communists in the old days were actually pretty cool as well, So these labels have changed over time. The Marxist theory of state, and but in the old days, being an activist actually took work, and you had to kind of read these things and then go to meetings and discuss them. And even though there are a lot more left-wing people around today than there were in the early 80s, a lot of that is about sharing memes and repeating slogans and not much else. So 2008 was kind of exciting. I started a blog called Moron Watch and just started blogging, and it became really popular because I had a perspective and this kind of deep Marxist type understanding that a lot of people didn't have. And I was really enjoying it, and I built a big following. And then there was this light bulb moment in 2011 where lots of things happened at the same time. And I wrote a blog post at the time, it's all still up there on the Moron Watch blog, called I Never Left the Left left me. And that was the kind of moment when I broke from the left, which for me was kind of emotional because I've been there since I was born, really. I'm going to start quickly by I'm going to talk about fascism. So the first thing I'm going to do is define it, because everyone talks about fascism and no one knows what it is. And thanks to having read Trotsky, What is Fascism, How to Fight It, I think I have a slightly better perspective. Trotsky didn't get it all right, but at least he tried to define it. So fascism isn't military dictatorship. It's not Saddam Hussein, or everyone used to call General Pinochet a fascist dictator. These aren't fascist dictators. People who seize power by military coup, that's not fascism, that's authoritarianism, it's a military coup. Fascism is something a lot deeper. Fascism is a deep cultural, ultra-conservative backlash that builds in society, and it's a bottom-up movement, it's not a top-down movement. It's something that builds from the grassroots, and it is more likely to express in deep social conservatism, like an anti-sex attitude or wanting to ban drugs. But fascism is basically a demand that change stops. It's a demand that things go back to the old days, to a simpler time. And it's a scary movement. It's much scarier than military coup, because there's nothing you can do about it. It's a flood of demand from people in the streets, from society, for a clampdown, for everything to stop, for all progress to stop. So it's anti-science, it's anti-globalization, it's anti-everything that's happened in the last 50 or 100 or 200 years. And possibly, it's also demand for conformity, which is why, as a side effect, fascism affects minorities, so whether it's gays or ethnic minorities, Jews, whatever. Not as a direct result, but simply because everyone wants things back the way they were, and there weren't Jews and black people and gays in the old days, and so these people are likely to get caught in the backlash. Most of all, maybe more technically, it's a rejection of Enlightenment values. And so the Enlightenment, which is 200-300 years old, was the birth of liberalism, and you could say the birth of libertarianism. The Enlightenment, the key values in Enlightenment I put down to three things: liberty, including free speech most importantly; equality, not in maybe the modern left-wing concept, but the genuine belief that all people should be treated equally; and reason, or, as it was, the Enlightenment and science came out of the same movement. So it's really a belief. The Enlightenment's about a belief in science and about the belief in reason and evidence and thought over dogma and superstition. So fascism, you could say, is a counter-Enlightenment. It's an attack on all of these things. And so if you want to understand whether, say, Donald Trump's a fascist or whatever, if you want to understand whether fascism's there, it's worth looking at, is there a deep social conservatism? Is there a deep attack on liberty? And is there an attack on equality and on reason stroke science? So I'm going to go back to my story a bit. And kind of in Porn Panic, I enjoyed writing the book because it's a political book and it's woven with my own story. And it was an interesting place to be. In 2004, after writing software for a few years, I launched Strictly Broadband, which was, as Simon says, it was a Netflix. It was a Netflix of porn, and it actually looked quite like Netflix, and it did basically what Netflix does. It was a rental site, so you went and chose your DVD, clicked rent, and then you had it for a week or whatever. So a fairly familiar model today. It was a profitable business. At the time, we charged about 10 quid for a 1 week rental, which, as all of you, or yeah, I'm sure, you may not all look at it, I'm sure you all do. The idea that you would pay £10 for one DVD, which is about 5 scenes of porn for a week, is crazy today. The value of that commodity collapsed. But for a while it was quite a good, profitable business. And having started this site, I had to become acquainted with UK censorship laws. And what I found out was that the UK has loads of censorship laws, and pretty much all of them had been swept aside by the internet. So not only, the UK has one classic censorship law, which is the Obscene Publications Act, in which anything obscene is banned. And obscenity is just defined by a jury. So a jury has to decide, for something to be obscene, a jury has to decide whether something can deprave or corrupt its viewers. And it's a Victorian act, and it sounds really old-fashioned. And the obscenity laws kind of died in the social revolutions of the 1960s. They kind of didn't make sense anymore. And Britain was one of the few countries. Denmark scrapped theirs, Germany scrapped theirs, Sweden scrapped theirs. The kind of more liberal countries scrapped their obscenity laws because it was just stupid, the idea that watching something could deprave or corrupt you. Britain didn't. We held on to ours because that's the kind of country we are. But the authorities almost stopped prosecuting. The last famous prosecution was Lady Chatterley's Lover in 1951, I think, which was a book, not a video, and where Penguin Books won their case. They got the right to publish it, and it's now a classic. So the Obscenity Act, the Obscene Publications Act, kind of became gradually defunct, and that would have all been fine, except that after the late 60s, early 70s, this great liberal upswell that led to the legalisation of abortion, divorce becoming easier, death penalty being abolished. That's probably the most liberal period in modern British history. And we haven't noticed this yet because the internet's come along and we've been able to ignore what's been going on in the background because we've been able to look at all these things we didn't have before. So what I learned by becoming, getting used to getting to know the UK censorship laws and the censorship authorities, were that there were these really small-minded bureaucrats who sat there doing almost nothing because they had nothing to censor on the internet. Their laws didn't cover the internet, but they were really upset about the internet. These were people who had power. They can control. They can control deeply what happens on TV, on DVD, on video, on the radio. But they had no power over the internet, and this infuriated them. And these were powerful establishment people. And so what I very quickly realised, so I launched my site, I realised that I could do pretty much within reason whatever I wanted and publish what I wanted. But I made sure that I couldn't be prosecuted for obscenity. And I realised two things very quickly. One thing was that the UK authorities were going to come after the internet, that they had been watching it take their power for years, and that they were going to do something about it. And that was a perspective that almost no one else got, because no one else got that these censorship people even existed. The second thing was that porn is a really good excuse for censorship. So when they censor the internet, they're going to use porn as the excuse. But once you have a censorship regime, it's really easy to switch on a second, third, fourth category of content. So I kind of began campaigning, but as an industry person, I was defending my own business. And then around 2007, the free sites came along, and the industry, you've never seen an industry collapse like this. Literally, the industry probably declined 95% in a really short time. But my campaigning became important. Interestingly, a lot of the porn industry started lobbying for censorship because they wanted to get rid of the free content. And I decided to campaign against, even though that was against my business interests. So eventually I closed my business, 2012. I set up the Sex and Censorship campaign. I eventually got my book published. And so there are these bodies out there that no one pays much attention to. The BBFC, Ofcom, there was one called APVOD, and no one pays much attention to them. And I've been kind of warning and speaking to journalists that very soon they're going to come after the internet and they're going to use porn as the excuse. And so I became this kind of conspiracy theorist to this bloke that seems to know what he was talking about, to literally last October, they announced that the BBFC, which has been the British Film Censor since 1912 or something, is going to get the power this year to block websites that they consider to be illegal. And that's happened without almost anyone noticing, because they've been talking about protecting children from porn. That's been the language they used. So the Digital Economy Bill, which is going to become the Digital Economy Act this year, is going to give the BBFC, which is has little dusty offices in Soho Square, it's going to make the BBFC the British official internet censor. We're going to become the first democratic country with an internet censor, and almost nobody's noticed yet. That's where we're at. A bit of background now on. So that's what I'm going to say about the censorship regime. What I'm actually going to talk about is moral panics and the politics and of censorship and of an anti-sex politics. So slightly older people will remember Mary Whitehouse, who was from the 60s right until she died in 2001, was kind of the British Christian morality voice, and she moaned about everything, and she became a kind of laughing stock. In the 90s, she became a laughing stock, but she was a powerful woman, and she died in 2001, and the 90s was a really liberal era, and in 2001, her dying kind of seemed to fit, it's like we're at the end of this period when Christian fuddy-duddies can tell us what we can see and what we can do, which was cool. So, in all respect, we didn't really miss her very much. What happened around there was the beginning of an upswing in the beginning of the end of liberalism, the beginning of an upswing of authoritarianism. And what happened at the time was that new morality groups popped up. But these weren't right-wing Christian, Daily Mail, old ladies. These were young, left-wing, and based primarily around the feminist movement, which was a bit weird for me, because I kind of seen the feminism as a broadly progressive, left-wing kind of thing. And I began to get involved in sexual freedom campaigning, and I started doing debates at universities. I defended porn, not because I was selling it, but because I felt it needed defending, because nobody was defending it, and it seemed quite a hard thing to defend. So it was kind of fun doing university debates and stuff. And I came up against these anti-sex feminists, and having been out of politics, I kind of had to update myself on what had happened in left-wing politics in recent decades. And what I discovered was that around the late 70s, the 60s died in the 70s, that liberal era of the 1960s. And around the late 70s, this new kind of conservative anti-sex feminism was born. And anti-sex feminism wasn't just a weird little cult. Anti-sex feminism was the thing that introduced what I call fascist values into the political left. So if you want to look at the moment the left died, it was probably the moment that anti-sex feminism was born in the United States, that feminists in the 1980s teamed up with the religious right and the Reagan administration to ban pornography. So you had feminists who were supposed to be left-wing sitting with Christian fundamentalists who wanted to ban abortion, campaigning jointly to ban pornography. And so pornography, people say it's the canary in the coal mine. Pornography is one of the first things that you notice. If you want to look out for fascism on the rise, look at the state of the pornography and drugs and other fringe kind of things. Then I noticed, I was a loyal Guardianista since forever, and then I noticed that The Guardian was gone really conservative, was campaigning for porn to be banned, prostitution to be banned, strip clubs to be closed down. And this infuriated me, because it's worse when your own tribe goes really stupid. I expected Tories and church people and stuff to be stupid, but when the left turned stupid, that really drove me nuts. So there's a fair bit in here about The Guardian and the kind of ultra right-wing stuff that The Guardian started to do that just didn't make sense. And not only The Guardian, but sections of the Labour Party, the trade union movement, these bodies that were born to lift people out of poverty were now trying to get prostitution banned and strip clubs closed down and stuff. And as I say, this drove me nuts, because this was my tribe, My tribe isn't allowed to be stupid, And so there was this kind of light bulb moment in 2011 when when I kind of woke up and I began campaigning. I chaired ATA, which was a porn industry trade association, and campaign. I tried to get them interested in anti-censorship campaigning, but they weren't really interested. They were business people. So I started Sex and Censorship. And then, so I was starting to watch the anti-sex feminists and seeing, they weren't just after pornography. They were trying to ban Page 3. They were trying to ban lads' mags. They just started a load of morality campaigns. And then it all went to shit in 2011. I started looking at free speech as an issue. There's no free speech movement in this country. I was invited as a pornographer to Parliament to talk about porn filters and to talk about whether children needed to be protected from porn. So I thought, this is cool, I'm going to start meeting the high and mighty people of the civil liberties movement. And it turns out I was the civil liberties movement, and I run a small company with 10 employees. And so, all of this stuff started to scare the shit out of me, and I started trying to get people aware as to what was going on. And in 2011, one of the big things that happened was the riots. And the riots came around the time that something new had happened, social media. So for the first time, publishing and communication had been removed from the state, and suddenly people could communicate freely. And so you've got the police and David Cameron and everyone blaming for the riots, blaming Twitter, BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, which was big at the time, and the beginnings of calls to censor the internet because they blamed the internet for the riots. And then this thing began that I call the war on Twitter. And again, initially there was the Twitter joke trial. I don't know who remembers that, but a bloke tweeted, he was going on holiday and there was snow and they closed Robin Hood Airport in Nottinghamshire. So he tweeted, Robin Hood Airport's closed, you better get your shit together next week or I'm going to blow the place sky high. So he was arrested, he was charged, he was prosecuted, and he went to court and he was found guilty of malicious communication, I think. And then he appealed, and luckily people got involved. Stephen Fry then got involved and started funding his appeals. It took 3 appeals for him to be found not guilty. So this started to look, this wasn't about a bloke, this was about the state looking at this internet thing that they hate and wanting to get their claws into it. And the state lost. but they'd picked the wrong fight. The next fight, this time, this is where the feminist movement really began to become an important pro-censorship force, because the next battle was a journalist called Caroline Criado Perez. I don't know if you remember this, but Caroline ran a campaign to get a woman put on the new £5 or £10 note. I think she wanted Jane Austen.
Yeah.
And so cool, you know, good for her, fine. And then, of course, some wankers on Twitter started to be horrible to her and be sexist, and someone said, you deserve to be raped, and, you know, it got nasty. And this stuff had always gone on online. I've been online since 1988, so people have always said that kind of shit online. The difference was that there were now middle-class people online, and working-class people were discovering them. And the one line that cannot be crossed is working-class people and their rough language getting into the world of middle-class people. That's what it was ultimately about. So Caroline Criado Perez was, you know, terribly shocked and offended. And if you followed the news reports at the time, there were thousands of people tweeting rape threats at her, which was bollocks. I mean, it came down, there were 2 people using a few Twitter accounts being really horrible to her. But it became a feminist issue, and the feminist movement then rallied to censor Twitter, because obviously you can't have free speech if people are going to say horrible things to women. And I mean, it was interesting that it was the feminist movement. What was also interesting was that this was not a feminist message. I remember the women's lib movement. The women's lib movement was very much about women can cope with anything men can cope with. You know, women are equal. This new feminist movement is the opposite. Women cannot cope with the kind of shit that men cope with, and the state and something needs to be done to stop women having to cope with this kind of language. So you have this myth that thousands of tweets were being sent, and rape threats, misogynistic, you know, all the stuff that misogynistic Twitter trolls, the thing, you know, and this suddenly became moral panic after moral panic. So by now I'm running a campaign, and so I'm kind of there following in real time and countering stuff in real time. But the police eventually arrested the 2 people who were harassing her, and annoyingly one of them was a woman, which kind of made the whole misogyny thing a bit, you know, crap. In fact, the lead perpetrator was a woman. She was 23, she was clearly an alcoholic, she was probably mentally ill, and it was like, and the press tore these 2 people to shreds and sent them to prison. And this was not just, this was class war. This wasn't just the middle class taking revenge against working class oiks for daring to step out of their territory. This was the state saying enough is enough. We're going to get our claws back into this free speech that you've had via Twitter. And so, again, what infuriated me, the bulk of this pro-censorship movement was left-wing, and I felt that the left had been the heart of the free speech movement originally, so this was wrong. And then there were just a series of panics. I don't know if you remember Dapper Laughs. He got accused of being sexist. He got torn to pieces, his career ruined, and again it was a feminist campaign against him. He was a comedian. Julien Blanc, who was a pickup artist, who, you know, was going to come to the country and do a tour explaining to men how to pick up women. He got not just torn to pieces. Theresa May, the Home Secretary, blocked him from coming into the country. You know, this became political. And then Shirtgate, which was the one where the astronaut, the guys who put the probe on the comet, the poor scientist turned up to the press conference to announce how well they'd done, and he had a shirt with nude images of women on it, and the feminist movement went nuts and tried to destroy him. And
the shirt was made by a woman as well.
Yeah, that's right. It was made by a friend of his.
Yeah, I've met her as well. She's a nice person.
Cool.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, by then I was just deep involved in this crazy chaos that was rising, and it was scary because it was the beginning of something really bad, and it continues to be the beginning of something really bad. So, and then they start blurring speech with action, which is classic pro-censorship stuff. So where you start to, you know, saying horrible things to someone and doing horrible things to someone are different things. And when you start to blur the line, and well, we taught that when we were kids, sticks and stones. That's what we learn. But now, misogynistic Twitter trolls became cyber violence, and suddenly the word violence is used for speech, and this is really dangerous. And this wasn't just in the papers. This is in the United Nations, the World Health Organization. This becomes a global movement, and again, it's a global feminist movement to censor the internet. And then, of course, hate speech, which is one of the most dangerous categories around because it can mean anything you want. And so the authorities have now found a way to start attacking people and their free speech on the internet. So I started to look at the possibility of a fascist left. There is a fascist right, it's the EDL, it's possibly Le Pen in France, it's possibly Wilde. There is a fascist right in Europe, and Europe, even though fascism is very different from what it was 30, 50 years ago. But what I was looking at was a fascist left, and I wanted to, the litmus test is liberty, equality, and reason, and what is the attitude of the left to these things? So then there was a rising attack on free speech, shall I say. There was a campaign by Object, which is a feminist group, and The Guardian, to censor music videos, sexualized music videos, they called it. And actually, as I followed this campaign, it got increasingly racist because actually most sexualized music videos tend to be hip-hop, R&B, dancehall, whatever it is, black music that they were after. And this was increasingly a white movement against black music. And it got, it got increasingly strange that, this racism rising on the left. There was a rapper called Tyler, the Creator, from California, who was accused of misogyny. It started, an Australian feminist group accused him of misogyny when he wanted to tour there, and the Australian government banned him, and then Theresa May banned him. So here we have left-wing groups using left-wing language, attacking free speech and black people especially. And it was, yeah, as I said, I'm still reeling because this is my tribe. And then you have the rise of No Platform, which again is a very left-wing anti-free speech movement. No Platform began in the 1970s, and it was called No Platform for Fascism. And it was a very tightly defined thing that you would not give a platform to groups that were declared, that were dedicated to violence and the overthrow of democracy. Now No Platform is anything, and you'd have probably seen the Milo thing yesterday in Berkeley, where I think Milo is a bit of a troll and a bit of a loudmouth and can be a bit of an arse. But actually, he was going to Berkeley, which was once the home of free speech. Milo was going to campaign against this thing called cultural appropriation, which is basically a new way of a new justification for racial segregation. So Milo, whatever big mouth he might be, he's also a gay Jew. He was going to Berkeley to campaign against what I would call racism, and the left were out in force. They rioted, they stopped him talking, they wrecked the place, and they gave. I think Trump could be classified as a fascist. They played into the hands of the fascist right. They gave Donald Trump an excuse to tweet that he might withdraw funding from Berkeley. He probably won't. He's an idiot too. He just says what he wants. But he also gave the fascist right an excuse to say we're going to come with weapons next time. So here's a fascist left fueling the rise of a fascist right and attacking the fundamental values of democracy. And then cultural appropriation, which I could talk about, on its own, and I discovered via the sexual freedom campaigns I was doing. It came in via that. But this is what it made me think of. I don't know, as you can't see the screen. There's a leaflet from the Citizens Council of Greater New Orleans, and it's about 1965, and it says, "Stop, help save the youth of America, don't buy Negro records." this is merely campaign against cultural appropriation, and it says, if you don't want to serve Negroes in your place of business, then do not have Negro records on your jukebox or listen to Negro records on the radio. This is a call to stop white people appropriating black culture, which is what the left is now doing. And this now, to me, the left and the far right have almost changed places. The left today is campaigning incessantly to segregate people by race, to tell white people that they shouldn't be wearing Asian clothes or listening or playing black music or doing hip hop or whatever. This is fascism, and it's become not just the left, the Guardian and the New Statesman and these kind of quite centrist, leftist kind of organs are campaigning for this. And then, I mostly talked about liberty. Liberty is the key thing. Free speech is the key thing. Equality is another thing that's under attack. So, cultural appropriation is one example. If you go and study critical race theory or whatever bollocks that they teach this stuff in university, they'll teach you that cultural appropriation is not a two-way thing. So black people can appropriate white culture because they're oppressed, the poor tears. It's incredibly patronizing. It creates a hierarchy in which white people are here and black people are here. So white people can't appropriate black culture because black people are low. Black people can appropriate white culture, of course. So, if you say, whatever white culture you want to name, but that's okay. And the same, Asian and whatever. I'd like to try these people out with, say, can Indians appropriate black culture or vice versa, which way is the hierarchy? It's bollocks, they don't understand what they're talking about. But it's very dangerous because the rule is races shouldn't mix. That's what this is about. And so that's the equality thing. In terms of reason and science, am I running on a bit? I'll try and stop shortly, or I can keep going forever. I told you I might do a bit of a Castro.
You've got, we started late, you've got 20 minutes.
Oh, really?
That includes the Q&A.
Okay.
And I've got loads to add to your Q&A.
Okay, I'll give it 5 minutes or so. I found that, the lack of reason, that in fact that the hatred of science that was grown on the left is another frightening aspect, and as I say, it's a kind of touchstone, a cornerstone of fascism. I go and debate porn at universities and so I debate against these people, and they have no argument whatsoever. This is why they've come up with words like objectification and sexualization and porn addiction and things that actually don't mean anything and don't exist, but these are their arguments. I'll give you, there's a whole chapter on here for those who want to buy it. It's at Amazon. But in a nutshell, not only is there no evidence that porn is harmful, but there is actually evidence that societies with easy access to porn have lower rates of sexual violence. That's the summary of the evidence. And so you're debating, it's like debating with creationists. They have their own facts and they have no evidence to back them. But not only that, there's an entire sweep of anti-science attitudes on the left. Blank slate ideology, I call it in general. The idea that we're all born with the same brain and that it can then kind of become whatever you want to be. It's a nice 60s hippie liberal thing, but it's not true. Our genes deeply influence our brains and our behaviors. And in particular, we know that male and female brains, on average, are different. There's a big overlap and there's a big spectrum, but on average, the average male and the average female do not have the same brain. Scientifically, that's not controversial. In terms of left-wing politics and feminism, that's deeply controversial because they absolutely deny that. And this is important because feminists today insist not on equal rights, but on equal outcomes. They insist that men and women there should be 50% of us. There should be 50% women in this room. And the fact that there aren't is clearly a sign that this is a sexist organization. There should be 50% women working at Google. There should be 50% women in science. There should be 50% women and men everywhere. And it's not going to happen because men and women on average are not the same. So this denial of gender difference is actually quite dangerous because the conclusion you draw is that you have to start policing human behaviour, and in particular boys' behaviour. You have to start programming boys to be less like boys, which is incredibly damaging. And if we carry on this way, it's quite frightening that where it might go. But effectively, feminists talk about biological determinism as something evil and terrible, and as a kind of false ideology. When feminists talk about biological determinism, they're talking about evolution. So what we've gone from 10 years ago, I was arguing with creationists on the internet and laughing at them, and they were denying evolution because God made the world and blah. Today, feminism and a large section of the left is denying evolution because it doesn't fit with a blank slate ideology, which is decades and centuries out of date. And then you could talk about, in terms of left-wing denial of science, I grew up in an era where we were deeply fearful of nuclear power. You may have had sessions on this, whatever. It turns out nuclear power is actually a lot better and safer than carbon fuel power at the moment. The left is wed to the idea of decommissioning nuclear. That's an anti-science position because actually in California and Germany and Sweden they're now decommissioning nuclear, which means their carbon emissions are going up, which is batshit crazy, but this is a religion. And GMO denial, I'm sure someone will come in and talk about GMOs at some point. But, I'll kind of wind up a bit. I think to say that the idea the ideas of left and right are kind of dead, and these are ideologies from the 20th and 19th centuries. These are tribal labels. They're wanting to belong to something. But the fact is that the further you go away from the kind of liberal centre, the more people agree with each other. So nationalism, for example, is the more you go right or left, the more nationalistic they become. We're in a counter-enlightenment, and I focused on left-wing fascism, but we also have a rise in right-wing fascism. And as I keep saying to people that want to slap them, it's like the left can't do fascism. The right knows how to do fascism. If the left tries to do fascism, the right's going to win because they know how to do this shit. So, and again, with the Milo shutdown yesterday, you had what you could describe as left-wing fascists just inviting Trump to send the army into universities. It's like so brain dead. The solution, the answer is easy. It's the Enlightenment, and we've had it for two and a half centuries or whatever, and most of all free speech. And I put along Enlightenment quotes up there, which are important, which I won't read out. But it's summarised as the solution to bad speech is more speech. And I've been tweeting that to people all day who have been supporting the attacks on Milo last night. But the fact is, neither people on the left nor people on the right believe that free speech is a good thing anymore, and that's really dangerous. Have I got another slide? Oh no, that's it. A nice picture of my book cover.